She found the folder by accident. Names. Dates. Photos. All of them women. All of them with the same look in their eyes, the look she saw every morning in her mirror. Who are these women, Cole? He didn't answer. He just smiled, and that smile was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen on a face she thought she knew. If you have ever looked at someone you loved and suddenly felt like you were staring at a stranger, stay. Because this story is yours. The city never fully slept. Even at 2 a.m. Atlanta breathed, generators humming like tired hearts, street lights flickering above wet asphalt. Serena stood on the balcony of her one-bedroom apartment, arms folded over her chest, watching the city refuse to rest and feeling, for the 100th night in a row, that she understood it completely. She was 28 years old and tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her phone sat on the plastic chair behind her, screen dim, 3 unread messages from her mother, one from her best friend Sophie that just said "You okay?" and one from a number she hadn't saved, a client who wanted his proposal revised by morning. She would answer all of them. She always did. That was the thing about Serena, she showed up for everyone. She revised the proposals. She called her mother back. She told Sophie she was fine. She just didn't know how to show up for herself. Inside, her apartment was clean in the way that lonely spaces are, everything in its place because there was no one to displace anything. A framed print above her desk that said, "You are enough," that she bought 2 years ago during a particularly bad week and had stopped actually seeing months ago. A single wine glass drying on the rack. A romance novel face down on her bed, the kind with a brooding man on the cover and a woman mid-laugh, the kind she read not because she was naive, but because for 20 minutes before sleep she wanted to live somewhere that love was simple. She had dated. Of course she had dated. There was Ryan, who was kind but boring in a way that felt like slow suffocation. There was the guy from her office whose name she now struggled to remember, who kissed her twice and then went cold without explanation. There was her situationship of 8 months with a man named Kevin who told her she was the most incredible woman he'd ever met, while simultaneously never making her a priority once. She had ended all of them. She was good at leaving. What she wasn't good at was the part before leaving, the part where she stayed too long because the warmth felt real even when the foundation was paper. Her mother called it being picky. Sophie called it having standards. Serena called it being terrified, though she would never say that out loud. She picked up her phone, opened the client email, started typing. Across Atlanta, on the 3rd floor of a serviced apartment that cost more monthly than Serena made in 4 months, Cole Adeyemi was getting dressed to go out. He stood before a full-length mirror and took inventory of himself the way a contractor examines a building before a client walkthrough, dispassionately, efficiently, looking for anything that might need adjustment. Dark shirt. Good jaw. The kind of easy, unhurried confidence that people mistook for depth. He ran a hand over his face and decided he looked exactly right. Cole was 33. He worked in private wealth management, which meant he moved money for people who had too much of it and understood the precise psychology of desire, how people wanted things not for what those things were, but for what having them would say about them. He applied this understanding to everything in his life. His apartment. His car. His relationships. He had never used the word manipulation. That was a word for people who lacked self-awareness. Cole preferred curation. He curated experiences. He curated impressions. He curated the version of himself that each situation required. Tonight he was going to his colleague James's birthday at a rooftop bar in Atlanta. He would be charming and a little mysterious. He would listen more than he spoke. He would make whoever he met feel like the most interesting person in the room. He had done this so many times it required no effort. It was simply what his face did, what his body language did, a fluency so deep it had long since stopped feeling like performance. What Cole rarely examined, what he kept in a room in himself that stayed locked, was the question of what he actually wanted. Not what he was good at. Not what worked. What he wanted. The question made him uncomfortable. So he got dressed and went out instead. The rooftop was exactly what a rooftop bar in Atlanta at 10 p.m. on a Friday was. Too loud, too bright, expensive drinks in short glasses, men in suits and women in backless dresses, the specific social electricity of people performing having a good time. Cole got a whiskey and found a corner with a view of both the city and the room, his preferred position anywhere, able to see everything, obscured by nothing. He saw Serena 40 minutes after he arrived. She was not supposed to be there. She had been dragged, That much was visible in the slight stiffness of her shoulders, the way she held her drink with both hands, the way her eyes moved around the room without landing anywhere with real interest. She was wearing a wine-colored dress and small gold earrings, and she looked like someone who was beautiful without trying and slightly annoyed about being there and completely, utterly unaware that she was the most arresting person on the rooftop. Cole noticed all of this in approximately 12 seconds. He noticed something else too, something that should have given him pause, that in a different version of him would have. She was the kind of woman who was paying attention. Not to the room, not to the performance of the night, to something. Her eyes had stopped moving and she was watching a couple near the bar, an older man and woman, and there was something on Serena's face that Cole couldn't immediately name. It was longing. Pure and unguarded and real. He crossed the rooftop. "You look like you're at the wrong party," he said. She turned. Looked at him with eyes that did not immediately soften the way most women's did when Cole spoke to them. That registered. "I look like I'm at exactly the right party," she said. "I just don't look like I'm pretending to enjoy it." He smiled. Not his practiced smile, something smaller, something that surprised even him. "Fair," he said. "Cole." Serena. They talked for 2 hours. She was sharper than he expected, which he told himself was a pleasant surprise and was not yet honest enough to recognize as a warning to himself. She pushed back on 3 things he said. She laughed without covering her mouth. She asked him a question about his work and then, when he gave the polished answer, tilted her head and said, "But what do you actually think about it?" Nobody asked Cole that. He walked her to her Uber at midnight. He did not ask for her number, he asked if he could give her his. The distinction mattered to her, he could tell. She saved it without committing to anything. Driving home, Serena stared out the window at the city blurring past and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen. She told herself to be careful. She told herself this the way you tell yourself not to touch a hot stove, right before you reach out anyway. The moment you stop seeing the flags because the feeling is too good. Cole texted 3 days later. Not immediately, and that was the thing Serena would later understand had been intentional, though in the moment she experienced it only as relief. 3 days was long enough that she had half convinced herself she'd imagined the connection, that she'd romanticized a rooftop conversation into something it wasn't, that Cole was simply another man who collected interesting women the way people collected books they never finished reading. Then her phone lit up at 7:43 in the morning, while she was brushing her teeth, and his name on her screen did something embarrassing to her heartbeat. "I'm still thinking about the thing you said about people performing their own lives. I don't think I've stopped thinking about it." She stood in the bathroom for a full minute, toothbrush in hand, reading it twice. She typed back, "Most people don't like it when you say things like that." His reply came in under a minute. "I'm not most people." And there it was, the first red flag, dressed so perfectly in confidence that it looked like a green one. They had their first real date 8 days after the rooftop. He chose the restaurant, a quiet, expensive place with low lighting and a menu that had no prices on the side facing her. She noticed that. She also noticed that he had remembered she mentioned preferring fish to meat, and had made a reservation near the window, and had arrived 7 minutes before she did so she would not be the one waiting. These were not accidents. She did not yet know that. "You planned all of this," she said, after they'd been seated. "I paid attention," he corrected. "There's a difference." She looked at him across the table, the easy way he held himself, the way his eyes stayed on her face like nothing else in the room existed, and felt the thing she always felt in the early days of something, the terrifying, electric sense of this might be real. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said. "Not the version you give people at parties." Something moved across his face. Quick. Gone before she could name it. "I don't sleep well," he said. "I haven't since I was about 19. I lie in the dark and my brain just runs. Goes over everything. Looks for the gaps." It was the most honest thing Cole had said to anyone in years. He wasn't sure why he said it. He told himself it was strategy, vulnerability as a tool, closeness as currency. But the telling of it felt strange in his chest, like pressing on a bruise he'd forgotten was there. Serena leaned forward slightly. "Gaps in what?" "In whatever I've built," he said. "Whatever I'm building." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." "Do you ever just let something be imperfect and stay anyway?" He looked at her. The question landed somewhere uncomfortable and real. "No," he said. "I don't think I do." She nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. He watched her do it and felt, for the first time in a long time, the unsettling sensation of being read. He leaned back, recalibrated, smiled. "Your turn," he said. "Something true." She picked up her wine glass, turned it slowly. "I fall in love with potential," she said. "It's my worst quality. I see what someone could be, and I love that version so hard that sometimes I miss who they actually are." The table went quiet. Cole held her gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, or rather, there was everything to say and none of it was safe. What he should have said was, "Then you should be careful with me." What he said instead was, "I think that makes you remarkable." She smiled, looked out the window at the dark street, and the thing that lived in her chest, that cautious, careful thing she had been protecting for years, moved. Opened, slightly, like a window after rain. The collision didn't happen at dinner. It happened 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon in her apartment, in the specific domestic intimacy of a rainy day, her feet across his lap, a film playing that neither of them was watching, his hand absent-mindedly tracing patterns on her ankle. She had let him in. Not just physically, she had let him in. He knew about her mother now, about the 8 months with Kevin, about the print on her wall she'd stopped seeing. He knew she cried at adverts with old people in them, and that she kept a journal she would never show anyone, and that her biggest fear wasn't being alone but being almost chosen, wanted enough to be kept, not enough to be prioritized. She had handed him the map to every tender, breakable part of her. And Cole had received each piece of information with the attentiveness of someone building something, though if you had asked him then, he would have said he was simply falling for her. He would have believed it. That was the most dangerous thing about Cole. He was not conscious of what he was doing. The performance had run so long it had swallowed the performer. "Jade. Hey. This is Serena." Jade turned to her. The look she gave Serena was not hostile. It was something stranger than hostility. It was a form of recognition. Like she was seeing something she understood from the inside. "Nice to meet you," Jade said. Her voice was even. Her eyes stayed on Serena 1 beat longer than was casual. She left 5 minutes later without really explaining who she was. Cole offered no explanation either. "Old friend," he said, turning back to the painting. "We worked together briefly. She's a bit intense." He said it lightly, dismissively, with the easy confidence of a man who does not expect to be questioned. Serena nodded, looked at the painting, said nothing. But she felt it, the pull. The invisible thread connecting what she had written in her journal and what she had just seen on his face. She didn't yet have the words for it. She didn't yet have the evidence. She just had the feeling, low and certain in her stomach, that she had just witnessed something she was not supposed to see. She reached for his hand anyway. He took it, squeezed it, turned to her with that full, focused attention that made her feel like the only person in the world. And she let it quiet the feeling in her stomach. She told herself, "You are not your mother. You don't invent problems. You are not going to ruin something real because of a moment you misread." She held his hand tighter. The painting in front of them was all sharp angles and fractured light, something beautiful that had been broken and reassembled slightly wrong. She stared at it and felt, without being able to explain why, that it was the most honest thing in the room. That night, lying beside him in the dark, she listened to him breathe and did the thing she had sworn she wouldn't. She started cataloging. Every cancelled plan. Every subject he pivoted away from. Every time she had softened a question because his face told her not to push. Every moment she had talked herself out of her own instincts. The list was longer than she wanted it to be. She turned her head and looked at his profile in the dark. The face she had memorized. The face she had looked at across a dinner table and felt her eyes fill. The face she had let herself love. "Who are you?" she thought. Quietly. The way you think something that is too big to say out loud. He slept peacefully. She did not sleep at all. She's starting to see it. Not clearly yet, but the way you see something underwater. Distorted. Real. And the terrifying thing is that she still loves him. That's not weakness. That's what love does. It stays even when the mind starts to know better. It started with a storm. Not metaphorically, an actual storm. The kind the city produced in March without apology, sudden and total, the sky dropping from gray to black in under 20 minutes, rain hitting the streets with the violence of something that had been held back too long. Serena had been caught in it on her way back from a client meeting in the city, her umbrella useless against the sideways wind, her dress soaked through by the time she reached her car. She called Cole without thinking about it. That was the thing she would remember later, that she called him without thinking. That his number was the one her hands went to when something went wrong. That was the measure of how deep it had gone. He answered on the second ring. "Where are you?" "Stuck. The traffic is, Cole, I can't even see the car in front of me." "Stay where you are." His voice shifted into something calm and certain that her nervous system responded to immediately. "Don't drive in this." "I'm coming." "You're in 6. "I'm coming, Serena." He drove 45 minutes through flooded the city roads to sit in traffic outside her location for another 30. When she finally got into his car, soaking and shivering slightly, he looked at her for a long moment and then reached into the back seat and produced a hoodie she hadn't known was there. "Put this on." She pulled it over her head. It smelled like him. She hated how much that helped. He didn't say anything else. Just drove. One hand on the wheel, the other finding hers in the dim interior of the car, and they sat in the crawling traffic while the rain hammered the roof and the city stalled around them, and Serena felt, against everything her journal had been telling her, completely, dangerously safe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me for that, Cole. That's what you do." He said it roughly, like the words had come from somewhere that surprised him. His jaw was tight. Eyes on the road. "You don't thank someone for that." She looked at his profile. That jaw. That face she had memorized in the dark. "Who taught you that it was remarkable?" she asked softly. "Showing up for someone?" He was quiet for a long time. The rain. The traffic. The windscreen wipers working steadily. "My father didn't," he said finally. "Show up. For anything." He was present physically and completely, absent in every way that counted. He paused. "So I think I learned that being there was extraordinary. Something you earned. Not something you just did." It was the most unguarded thing he had ever said to her. Serena turned it over carefully, the way you handle something fragile. "And your mother?" "She showed up for him," Cole said. Right until she couldn't anymore. A short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I spent a long time being angry at her for that. Took me longer to understand she was just doing what she'd been taught love looked like." The traffic moved slightly. He followed it. "We repeat what we learn," Serena said quietly. Half to him. Half to herself. "Yeah." His hand tightened briefly on hers. "We do." She looked out at the rain-blurred city and felt the journal entry surface in her mind. "I think I am loving the version of him I invented," and pushed it back down. Because this felt real. This felt like the underneath of him, the part that wasn't curated, the part that ached. She wanted so badly for this to be the real part. They ended up at his apartment that night, the first time she had stayed over and genuinely stayed, not just fallen asleep but woken in the morning with the full intention of being there. She borrowed a t-shirt and made tea in his kitchen while he showered, and she stood in that sleek, expensive, slightly impersonal space and tried to read it the way she read people. The apartment was beautiful, and it told her almost nothing. There were no photographs. She had noticed this before and set it aside, but standing in the kitchen now she noticed it again. No family photos, no framed memories, nothing personal on the walls except carefully chosen art. A bookshelf with books arranged by color rather than subject, which was either aesthetic or the choice of someone who wanted the impression of reading more than the substance of it. A succulent on the windowsill. One. Perfectly healthy. The kind of plant you got because it didn't need much. She was still looking at it when he came in, hair damp, in a gray t-shirt, and caught her expression. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She handed him his tea. "Your apartment doesn't look like you live in it." He took the mug. Looked around slowly, as if seeing it through her eyes. Something shifted in his face, not defensiveness. Something quieter. "I've never really made a place feel like mine," he said. "I move a lot. Or I used to. It stops feeling worth it after a while. Making things yours. Putting down roots." He leaned against the counter. "Roots mean you're staying." Staying means you can lose the thing you stayed for. Serena set down her own mug. Looked at him directly. That's a very lonely way to live, Cole. He met her eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, something in him went completely still, the way a body goes still when something lands exactly in the center of a wound. Yeah, he said. It is. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him, and he held on in the way of someone who didn't know they were drowning until something solid appeared. She felt him exhale against her hair. This is real, she told herself. Whatever else is complicated, this is real. What she did not know, what she could not have known in that kitchen, in that embrace, with his arms around her and the storm quieting outside, was that 3 days before, Cole's phone had received 14 messages from a number saved only as Jay. What she did not know was that Jade was not an old colleague. What she did not know was that 4 months before he met Serena on a rooftop, Cole had been in something with Jade. Not a relationship, he would not have called it that, he never called them that, something he had ended in the way he ended things, gradually, without a direct conversation, by becoming less available until the other person drew their own conclusions. What she did not know was that Jade had not drawn her conclusions yet. What she did not know was that Cole had read those 14 messages and responded to 2 of them. What she did not know was that the response to the second one read, "I've told you it's complicated right now. Give me time." She found out on a Wednesday afternoon. She had come to his apartment unannounced, not suspiciously, just spontaneously, a thing she had started to feel comfortable enough to do. She had a spare key because he had offered it 3 weeks ago, casually, the way you offer something when you want someone to feel chosen. She used it for the first time. She was carrying food from the restaurant he liked. He wasn't home. She set the food down, sent him a text, "Surprise, I'm here, where are you?" And while she waited, she moved around the apartment with the comfortable ease of someone beginning to feel at home in a space. She was at his desk, looking for a pen, when she knocked a folder to the floor. It fell open. And the papers that slid out were not work documents. They were printed photographs. 6 of them. Women, different settings, but each photo had a handwritten date and a first name on the back, written in Cole's handwriting in the small, precise script she had learned to recognize. The dates spanned 4 years. She recognized one of the names. Jade. August, 6 months ago. She sat down on the floor. Not because she chose to. Because her legs stopped working. She sat there on his expensive floor with 6 photographs in her hands and felt the world reorganize itself quietly around her into something she didn't recognize. She went back through everything. Every dinner, every conversation, every moment she had talked herself out of her own instincts. Every time she had told herself she wasn't her mother, she didn't invent problems, she didn't ruin real things with imagined fears. She had not imagined anything. She had seen clearly. She had simply chosen not to look. Her phone buzzed. "Cole, on my way back, 20 minutes. You okay?" She looked at the message. Looked at the photographs. Looked at her own name, which she now searched for among the papers with hands that weren't entirely steady, and found it. A single index card. Her name. The date they met. And 3 words beneath it in his handwriting that were so clinical, so deliberately recorded, that they reframed every single moment she had lived with him in the past 3 months. 3 words that answered every question she had talked herself out of asking. She would not say them out loud for a long time. But she sat on that floor and read them and understood, with a completeness that was almost peaceful in its devastation, that she had never been a person to Cole. She had been a project. She was standing at the window when he walked in. She did not turn around. She heard the door, heard his keys, heard the pause when he registered something was wrong in the quality of the silence. Serena. She turned. She was holding the folder. His face did the thing she had seen at the gallery, that 2-second calculation, that rapid recalibration. And then, for the first time since she had known him, what followed the calculation was not a smooth recovery. What followed was nothing. He stood in the doorway of his own apartment and had nothing. "Who are these women, Cole?" she asked. Her voice was very calm. She had not known she was capable of that kind of calm. It frightened her slightly, the steadiness of it, the way devastation at a certain depth stopped sounding like devastation and started sounding like clarity. He didn't answer. He just looked at her. And he smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Something stranger, The automatic reflexive response of a man whose face had learned to smile as a management tool and deployed it now out of pure, helpless habit, in the worst possible moment, because he had no other response available. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen on a face she thought she knew. The folder shook slightly in her hands. "Say something," she said. The smile faded. What replaced it was something she had never seen on him, raw, unmanaged, almost frightened. The face underneath all the faces. "Serena," he started. "Don't." Her voice cracked on the word. "Just once." Then held. "Don't say my name like that. Don't use that voice right now." He took a step forward. "Don't," she said again. He stopped. Outside the window, Atlanta carried on. The generators, the traffic, Atlanta that never fully slept. She stood in it and looked at the man she had loved and felt the specific, shattering grief of someone who has just understood that the thing they were mourning was never fully real to begin with. You cannot lose what you never had. But God, it felt like losing everything. She's standing in the rubble of something she built with her whole heart. And he is standing in the doorway of everything he is, finally, fully visible. No curation. No performance. Just the hollow space where a real person should have been. The moment you choose yourself is the moment love finally makes sense. She left the folder on his coffee table. Not thrown. Not scattered across the floor in the wreckage of the moment. She set it down deliberately, squarely, the way you set down something that no longer belongs to you. She picked up her bag from the couch. She found her spare key in her pocket, the one he had offered casually, the one she had accepted like a gift, and she placed it on top of the folder. She did all of this without a word. Cole stood in the doorway of his own apartment and watched her move through it with a quiet, terrible efficiency of someone who has made a decision so complete that there is no longer any point in conversation. He had seen women cry in this apartment. He had seen anger, accusations, the full emotional register of endings he had engineered from a careful distance. He had never seen this specific, devastating composure, this woman gathering herself like she was collecting the pieces of something precious he had handled carelessly. It was worse than anything he had seen. Serena. Her name in his mouth. Different now. Stripped of technique. Raw in a way he didn't know his voice could be. "Please." She stopped at the door. Her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around immediately. She stood with her back to him and he watched her breathe, one careful breath, and then another, and he understood that she was holding herself together by will alone and that the composure was costing her everything. She turned. Her eyes were dry. That was the thing that undid him. She was not crying. She was looking at him with an expression he had never been looked at with before. Not anger, not betrayal, something quieter and more final than either of those things. She was looking at him with understanding. "I'm not going to ask you why," she said. "I don't think you fully know. And I think that's the saddest thing about you, Cole, that you've been doing this so long you've forgotten it isn't normal. You've forgotten that people aren't things you collect and study and manage." She paused. Her voice held. "I think somewhere in you there is a person who genuinely wanted this to be real. And I think that person deserves help that I cannot give him." Cole opened his mouth. Closed it. "I loved you," she said. Simply. Past tense. Deliberate. "I loved the version of you that showed up in the rain and drove 45 minutes and held my hand in traffic. I don't know how much of that was real. But I loved it. And I'm allowed to grieve it." She looked at him one last time. The full inventory of him, the jaw, the face, the man-shaped space where something whole should have been. "I hope you figure out who you are when nobody's watching. I really do." She walked out. The door closed behind her. Not slammed. Closed. The quiet it left was the loudest thing Cole had ever heard. She made it to the stairwell. 3 steps down, hand on the railing, and the composure she had held so carefully in that apartment arrived at its limit, and she sat down on the concrete step and put her face in her hands and let it come. The grief, the anger, the humiliation, the love that had nowhere left to go. She cried the way she hadn't cried in years, the ugly, unself-conscious crying of someone who is completely alone and no longer performing anything for anyone. She cried for the 45 minutes in the rain. For the Sunday afternoon with his hand on her ankle. For the dinner table with the candle she'd been embarrassed about. For every instinct she had overruled, every question she had swallowed, every morning she had woken up beside him and chosen to believe. She cried for the girl who had stood on her balcony at 2 a.m. watching the city and aching for something real, and who had found something that looked so much like real that she had bet everything on it. She cried until there was nothing left. And then she sat in the stairwell of his building and breathed. Her phone was in her hand. She opened it. Opened Sophie's contact. Typed 3 words. "You were right." The reply came in under a minute. "No, I told you so." No questions. Just, "Where are you?" "I'm coming." Sophie arrived, sat on the plastic chairs, their place, carried in a takeaway bag that she held up wordlessly when Serena opened her apartment door. Serena looked at it and laughed, sudden and genuine and slightly broken, the kind of laugh that lives right next to tears. They sat on the floor. Not the couch, the floor, cross-legged, the soup between them, and Serena told her everything. The folder. The photographs. The index card. The 3 words she still had not said out loud to anyone. Sophie listened. She did not interrupt. She did not make the face of someone composing their response. She just listened, the way real love actually looks, present, patient, asking nothing. When Serena finished, Sophie was quiet for a moment. "What were the 3 words?" she asked gently. Serena looked down at the container in her hands. "Potential. High value. Acquire." She said it flatly, clinically, the way Cole had written it. Like a stock. Or a property. She shook her head slowly. "That's what I was to him. Something worth acquiring." Sophie reached out and put her hand over Serena's. "No," she said quietly. "That's what he tried to make you." Those are his words about himself, his inability to see a person as anything other than something to be gained. That has nothing to do with your worth. That is the full map of his damage. She paused. "You were never a project, Serena. You were a person he didn't have the capacity to deserve." Serena stared at the floor. The thing about truth, she was learning, was that it didn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it felt like standing in a burnt field and being told the soil was still good. You believed it. You just couldn't see anything growing yet. "I keep going back to something he said," Serena said quietly. "On the first night. At dinner. I asked him if he ever let something be imperfect and stayed anyway. And he said no." She looked up. "He told me. He literally told me. And I thought it was honesty. I thought it was vulnerability." A long exhale. It was a description. Sophie said nothing. Just held her hand. "I missed it," Serena said. "I saw it and I missed it." "You didn't miss it," Sophie said firmly. "You saw it and you hoped. There's a difference. Missing it would mean you weren't paying attention. You were paying attention. You just wanted to be wrong." She squeezed her hand. "That's not blindness, Serena. That's love. Love always hopes. It's supposed to. The problem isn't that you hoped. The problem is that he knew you would and used it." The city hummed outside. A generator somewhere. A car horn, distant, breathing. Serena closed her eyes. Something in her chest, the thing she had been holding tightly for 3 months, the fragile, careful architecture of what she had believed, she felt it settle. Not shatter. Settle. The way a structure finally stops resisting gravity and rests on the ground. It hurt. It also, strangely, felt like the first honest thing she had felt in months. She did not hear from Cole for 11 days. On the 12th day, he called. She watched his name on her screen until it stopped ringing. Then she blocked the number, not in anger, with the same deliberate quiet efficiency with which she had set the folder on his coffee table and placed the key on top of it. She started sleeping better almost immediately. She noticed this with something between surprise and fury, that her body had known before her mind, that her nervous system had been holding tension she'd interpreted as excitement, that the insomnia of those last weeks had not been the electricity of love but the low, chronic alarm of a self that knew something was wrong and had been overruled. She went back to the gym on Thursday. She revised the proposal that had been sitting half-finished on her laptop for 2 weeks. She called her mother, not to talk about Cole, just to talk, and halfway through the conversation she understood something she hadn't before. Her mother had not stayed in difficult relationships because she was weak. She had stayed because she had never been taught that leaving was allowed. That you could love someone and still choose yourself. That those two things were not opposites. "Mum," she said, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely. "I love you." A pause. Then her mother's voice, slightly flustered, slightly soft. "What's brought this on?" "Nothing," Serena said. "I just wanted to say it while I was thinking it." 3 weeks later, she went to the gallery. Not with anyone, alone on a Saturday afternoon, because there was an exhibition she had wanted to see for months and had never gone to because Cole had always redirected them somewhere else. She went by herself. She wore a yellow dress. She bought herself a coffee at the gallery cafe and walked slowly through rooms of honest, strange, imperfect art and felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely present in her own life. She stopped in front of a painting near the back. It was abstract, all warm colors and fracture lines, something that had been broken and rebuilt with the cracks left visible, filled in gold. She stood in front of it for a long time. There was a card on the wall beside it. The title of the piece was one word: kintsugi. She knew the word. The Japanese art of repairing broken things with gold. The philosophy that the breakage is part of the history, not something to hide. That the repaired thing is not lesser, it is more beautiful for having been broken and more honest for showing it. She stood in front of it and felt her eyes fill. Not with grief this time. With something she didn't have an immediate word for, something that lived in the space between loss and becoming. The specific, quiet emotion of someone who has survived something and is only now beginning to understand what they survived it for. She took a photograph of the painting on her phone. She opened her journal app, the digital one, not the one she told Cole about, the one she had never shown anyone, and typed, "I do not need to unlove what I lost. I loved it honestly, and that is not something to be ashamed of. But I am done building my home in someone else's performance of safety. My love is real. It deserves somewhere real to live. And I am not going to give it to someone who cannot receive it just because receiving is hard and I am used to working for things. I am not a thing to be acquired. I am someone to be known. There is a difference. I know that now. I'm keeping it." She closed the journal, finished her coffee, walked out of the gallery into the afternoon sun of a city that was loud and imperfect and entirely, completely alive. She tilted her face up to the light. She did not think about Cole. She thought about the painting, the gold in the cracks. The idea that what breaks you, documented honestly, becomes the most interesting thing about you. She thought, I am going to be okay. And then, quieter, more certain, the thing beneath it. I am already okay. She walked into the rest of her life. 6 months later. She was on her balcony at 2 a.m. again. Same city. Same generators. Same flickering lights above wet asphalt. But she was different. She could feel it the way you feel a healed bone, not in its presence but in the absence of the ache that used to live there. Her phone buzzed. "Sophie, are you coming tomorrow? The new place. Don't cancel on me." She smiled. Typed back, "I'll be there." She looked out at the city and thought about love, what it actually was, stripped of the performance and the longing and the desperate hope that this time, this person, this feeling would be the one that stayed. She thought it was probably simpler than she had made it. Probably quieter. Probably less like electricity and more like the way Sophie had arrived with soup and sat on the floor without being asked and held her hand while she said the unsayable. Probably more like that. She was 38 days into therapy. Her therapist was a small, precise woman named Dr. Collins, who had said something in their third session that Serena had written down immediately and stuck to her bathroom mirror, replacing the print that said "You are enough," not because that print was wrong, but because this was more specific, more earned, more hers. You don't need to perform okayness. You need to practice it. They are very different things. She was practicing. She was learning to sit with the imperfect version of herself, the one who had loved too fast, trusted a curated performance, overruled her own instincts 12 times and kept a running count. The one who had cried on a concrete staircase and sent 3 words to her best friend and meant them. The one who stood in front of a painting called kintsugi and felt the gold moving through her cracks in real time. She was learning that this woman, flawed, hoping, occasionally wrong, always paying attention, was not someone who needed to be fixed. She was someone who needed to be known. And for the first time in a very long time, Serena was beginning to know her. The city breathed. She breathed with it. And somewhere across the city, in a sleek apartment with no photographs and a single perfect succulent on the windowsill, Cole sat in the dark and felt the specific, unfamiliar ache of someone who had lost the only thing that had ever made him feel real, and was only beginning slowly, painfully, to understand why. He opened his laptop. He searched therapist. It was not redemption, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, just sometimes, a beginning is enough. Is this what you call love? No, my love. This is what you call survival. And survival, when you do it honestly, is where the real love story starts.